This is the second part of the conversation I had with David Tait, CEO of the World Gold Council. If you missed the first part of this conversation, I recommend you watch it. It is about David's very personal life story. David openly and courageously shares his journey and the abuse he experienced as a child. Difficult, at times horrific, but also incredibly inspiring. In this second part of our conversation, David and I discussed David's vision for the global gold industry, where the industry's problems lie, and how to help the industry solve those issues. David also explains where he sees the role of digitalization and how state-of-the-art technology can enable the industry to make gold more fungible, transparent, and accessible to all. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Send us any comments or questions you have, and be sure to hit that subscribe button if you think these conversations are worth your while. When you started your job at the World Gold Council as CEO, was that 4 years ago, 5 years ago?
2019.
2019. How did that come about, and what was your motivation to do that?
Well, I retired from Credit Suisse, formally retired. And I had 6 months off. I didn't use a phone. It's great. Beaches. It's a dream.
Did you spend that time in Mauritius, or where were you?
I visited as many beaches as I could.
Places,
that
many
was my
beaches.
thing. Yeah. Music, Shazam, music,
yeah.
Walk, and white wine. And then fortuitously, the film fell into that gap. And so I had a clear 18-month run on the film.
I see.
Luck.
Yeah.
And then the World Gold Council approached me, and I didn't know them. I never heard of them.
You weren't in gold trading. You were in currency trading.
I ran macro. So I ran FX, commodities, rates, and all the electronic businesses at Credit Suisse globally.
Okay.
So I had commodities.
And when you say you ran macro, was that a managed portfolio, a macro strategy? Or
No,
what
it's
do you
the
mean?
macro trading division.
Okay.
So I had 1,000 people, sales and traders across those 4 divisions within one division.
In London?
Yeah, and I reported directly into the CEO, and I ran one of 4. There was credit, EM, equities, and the macro division.
Macro.
So I was FIC, essentially. Yeah. So I ran that lot. And within there was the commodities operation. And I had a swift education as to what risk-weighted assets are, what the bank's CET1 ratio is, and all that good stuff. NSFR, HQLA. I learned all that at a pace. And I swiftly understood that if I gave assets to my commodities desk, the return on those assets was a lot less than if I gave it to my US dollar swaps desk. And even though I was making $500 million on my commodities desk net, I was making 50. And like for like, I was making 450 because of the cost of the capital usage. Why? I didn't really care. I didn't have time to figure it out. All I knew was it was what it was. And then one fateful day, I shut it down. I let everybody go. I saved my $500 million. I didn't lose any revenue.
So you were the one that actually shut down the gold business with Credit Suisse?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
A lot, right?
Shame on you.
And I took that capital.
Because, I mean, that thinking basically made also UBS, the business came down a lot. All the banks, basically. Switzerland being, the gold pool, the Zurich gold pool,
I kept electronic trading gold on EBS.
Okay. All right.
The physical business went out.
You didn't destroy it completely.
No. I kept a few DNA samples around for it, really, to be honest.
So it was your feeling guilty that led you to the World Gold Council.
Someone somehow steered me in this direction. But it was very useful that I saw that the reasons I shut that down weren't clear to me. I just knew I needed to take that capital and give it to some other guys who could do better things with it. That was it. That was the lesson. I left, I ended up in this role, and now I've got to fix why I shut it down. Very simple. Ironic, right? Perfect.
I'm with you.
And so all the reasons that the capital costs are high here are lack of trust, lack of transparency, opaque pricing, delivery versus payment is wrong. There's a ton of worries. It's got bad press. It goes on forever. Then you look at US dollar swaps, boring as hell. No barriers to entry, high barriers to entry. David, fix the barriers to entry. So I decided that once I'd got the World Gold Council pointing in the right direction, that was a bit of work in itself, I would focus on trying to solve for accessibility to gold, make it more accessible to everyone, barrier comes down. Fungible markets, join them up so the world, it looks a bit like US dollar swaps everywhere. Fungible markets, barriers come down. Make sure it's completely transparent, opaque, barriers come down, less opaque. And lastly, but most importantly, back to what we're doing, which is gold bullion integrity. Make sure what we say it is what it is, where they say it's come from. Barrier comes down. I won't get it all the way down because it's a physical product, but I can reduce it. And then maybe some of this capital over here will migrate back. And there's $200 trillion in assets trading all this stuff. If I got 5% of that to gallop back to gold, just think what that does to physical gold.
Before we go on that tangent, just explain briefly, the World Gold Council is the association of global gold miners, but also miners for other commodities as well. So what you're doing in the gold market, are you also considering extending that to other commodities? Because basically, I mean, if you look at the macro picture, we're now at a time when tangibles are going to become much more important. You know, we kind of had, with lower and lower interest rates, we had financial assets outperform tangibles to some degree, and now we're kind of going into a different type of cycle, and gold will benefit from that, but there's all kinds of reasons that actually other commodities could benefit from that as well. Are you focused entirely on gold with the World Gold Council, or in a broader way on commodities?
100% on gold is my remit.
Okay.
What's important is the Precious Metals Working Group, the subset of the FIC Market Standards Board I run. My remit is to first do gold and then go to base. I haven't decided I'm going to do that because it took 4 years to get us to the place we are with precious. But your point's well made. The same ecosystem needs to be improved for other precious metals.
It's the same issues.
It's the same issues. I'm not certain the same issues extend to base metals in certain areas, but it can deserve the same treatment and the same transparency, the same exchange traded products versus bilateral trading, which are always questionable. The better pricing mechanisms and transparency, pre and post trade, all that stuff can be improved. And as I've mentioned to you before, 4 years ago, we ran an assessment working with the FMSB, spent a lot of money to litmus test the market, and the gold market marked itself 5 out of 10. And then we set on this process of creating the spotlight document with all the major banks in London, including the LBMA, that have said, this is how we improve the situation. And this is what we must do going forward. And we've just set about the process of remediation, and I'm gathering the banks for this next stage. This document is utterly pivotal. It's a compendium, 3 chapters, market structure, post-trade, and data and surveillance. The post-trade chapter is the one that alludes to a digitalized future for gold. And I'm trying to marshal these banks down that corridor.
So if we structure this a bit, your vision, we're starting, and I say we because we work together in the context of aXedras. The World Gold Council has invested in aXedras, and we're now fellow, how do you say, fellow boardmen, or what's the English word? We're on the board together. We're board members and really enjoying working with you. We had our board of directors meeting yesterday. So where we're starting, we're now kind of starting with building the basis where the physical assets of gold are registered and relocated on a digital platform. So basically, and we kind of talk a lot about the topic of product integrity. Can you elaborate that a bit? You know, where we're starting to then go to those other places.
Well, going back to trust, so much of this goes back to trust. You've got risk officers in banks, you've got compliance officers in banks who don't trust this product. who don't understand it, they don't trust it at an institutional. This extends to retail too, but it's for institutions. And so it's trying to create an ecosystem that is immutable and as perfect as it possibly can be. And so simply put, the idea with working with aXedras is create a database for all good gold. Now good is a loose term, but think of all the good delivery lists, all the responsibly sourced, verifiable gold will go into this ecosystem, such that you'll have a ubiquitous method of being able to check that your gold, where it's come from. You can compare different good delivery lists. You can know where it's come from. You know how it's been mined. You know what region it's come from. You'll know everything about that gold if we get this correct. Mm. And we will eradicate duplication. We'll hopefully eradicate fraud. All the good things that we need to give the institutional bean counters and risk officers out there the comfort they need. Now, the London closed ecosystem, as we know, is pretty bulletproof as it is, but it can't stay that small. Mm. We need to extend it to the globe. So my hope is this ecosystem will grow and grow and grow over time, as long as we don't fail with the integrity aspects, keep it perfect. With gatekeepers who are accredited, grow and grow. You'll outside that ecosystem, if you sit outside that ecosystem over time, the value of your gold will decline because your market for that gold will decline, because eventually I want to make this ecosystem so well known that when you buy a ring or when you buy a gold bar, you will demand that the gold that made your product will have come from this ecosystem. So even if you don't get the positive affirmation, you won't buy it. That's my dream. And in doing so, I squeeze nefarious practice out of the world over time. I squeeze tax avoidance gold because your market will decline over time. Probably post-date my time on this earth, but over time. And ultimately, and this is where it ties back a bit to my story, I get the opportunity to create a conduit for artisanal mining, called illegal by some, into this ecosystem, hopefully, that is legitimate, and we formalize that business. Because in places like the Sahel and in Venezuela, kids are being used in mines. And if they steal a gram, because life needs them to steal a gram, much like a chocolate bar, they get their arms and legs chopped off by these gangs. So the thing that really, 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 without sounding too pious and holier than thou, that is what's driving me. Because if I can set that in train, that's good. That'll get me out of bed for another 10 years. And it removes, and also it allows me to take the World Gold Council and my miners and the staff with me on a mission that is so much more about bolstering the balance sheets of people who dig it out of the ground, as important as that is.
One of the things that we discuss a lot at aXedras and also on the board is the fact that there is no perfect world. And getting to a better world is a process. And that means that we also, when we talk about product integrity or the purpose of the system, it's not that we think that from one day to the next, everything will be perfect, but we want to provide the highway for better traffic rules. It doesn't mean that it's an exclusionary system, though. What doesn't mean, in my view, is that, for example, what happens today because of the lack of trust sometimes is that a place like Dubai will be excluded from the gold system entirely. As if everything that was done there is corrupt. In fact, there's many different jurisdictions. There's many different business models. And what we want to do is provide transparency so that product integrity becomes something which means that you know what you buy, you know what you get into, and therefore you can form your business policies that way. Mm-hmm. And that then, in a second step, creates a self-cleansing or self-improving system over time One of the things that I'm always a bit, concerned or also at times upset about is when NGOs, for example, obviously they mean well too, but when they start pointing fingers on problems, they really are looking for the hair in the soup, which we discussed, I think, earlier on, kind of missing the good that is being done in the industry and the jobs that are created, et cetera, et cetera. So I think what's important in our system and why it's good to have it on a distributed ledger is the fact that while providing rules and standards and that infrastructure for interaction and connecting the different players in the industry, it also allows for confidentiality still. It also allows for your individual business model. So it's not a centralistic approach which goes against the principles of free markets. But maybe going back to the good that the industry does, I think it's really important. You mentioned that, that in your travels, you're working with the mines. It's often there's a stigma that it's this dirty, corrupt business. And in fact, there's a lot of good that is being done.
Absolutely. I mean, just quickly before I go on to that, your reference to Dubai, we're about to open an office there, going back to opening an office there.
Good.
I have great signals from the UAE authorities who have wrapped their arms around the DMC Dubai authorities. And their intent is to raise the standards across the industry and sourcing standards to close off that conduit that we understand is being used. And I'm very positive on that. I took the view, ironically, much like the G7 did when they wrapped their arms around Putin to make it G8. You've got to laugh. But the effort to try and be inclusive and try and raise all ships was what I'm trying to do. Absolutely. I've got zero patience, one chance, but we will take that chance and try and move everything forward and upwards, to your point about it should raise all standards. But back to what the good the industry does, which is a little known story, and again, I believe a massive drop ball by our industry, because they didn't really take a view of the value chain. My miners will not mind me saying that they were very focused on the mines, legitimately. And they put the gold on a helicopter and got paid, done. I've come in with a view to the entire chain and said, if we can improve all these bits along the chain, the demand for your product will go up, simply put. And this is what I'm very pleased to say I have the support to go and achieve. One thing they never told anybody either, deliberately, is the good that the mines do in situ. Now, everyone's got their opinions about digging holes in the earth, big or small. You're entitled to them. What people don't know is what the mines do around these mines. And so, to test the hypothesis and understand it such that if I were ever interviewed, I would be able to talk with first-hand authority, not get called out. I visited the DRC last January, for example. I flew to the Kibali Barrick mine, a vast place. I've never seen anything like it, in the middle of the Congo. And I saw firstly the mine sites, which is open pit and a shaft. And I saw the shaft that had been previously filled up to the top. And then I saw the open pit mine. And it's mesmerizing how large the scale of this production is. And then they said, David, find the old one. I went, oh, look, find the old one. And I looked around, I couldn't see it. It had been landscaped and was fully green jungle again. You couldn't see it. And so I looked at it, and they were very proud of that. And I could see why. Extend it from the mine site itself, and you go to the surrounding. I spent most of my time outside in a convoy of Land Rovers and security. I felt like the president. It was incredible. But then you see roads, infrastructure, housing, lovely houses, by the way, not huts, lovely houses, medical, inoculations, schools, football fields, irrigated football fields, a cathedral. It went on and on and on. And the level of education there was startling. In fact, I didn't anticipate that, which is a bit of a bias. I admitted in myself, somewhat surprised, that any one of them could run rings around me intellectually.
That's a part of the soup they don't show.
So,
Because it's not interesting,
and then
it's
if you
not
just
negative.
to quote a few numbers, I don't know them all verbatim, but there's about 2 million people employed in that world, but outside the mines, there's roughly 6 or 7 in the supply chains. And in aggregate, I believe it is
Globally.
Yes, yeah. I believe in 2020 or 2019, it might have been 2020, we donated, the World Gold Council Mines gave $38 billion in tax revenue to those economies, which are, for $38 billion, it's like $380 billion to Switzerland, as an example. Mm-hmm. Huge sums, 16% of GDP of Suriname, as an example. Mm-hmm. Numbers that those economies really can't do without. Now, clearly, no one can legislate as to what they spend that money on.
Now, when you say that, just to be sure that we understand that correctly, what you're saying is the aggregate of the tax dollars that the members of the World Gold Council produced is 38 billion.
Most of it being spent in very third world countries, where the impact of that money is got a 10 times multiple. Right. That's what I meant. Yeah. Right. And so, does the industry do good? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And do they do their best to conform to the RGMPs, the Responsible Gold Mining Principles? Right. Yes, and they are audited to that mm-hmm. effect, and they will be exited if they do not comply. Mm-hmm. Believe me, the miners themselves, that's not me, they employ me, but they police themselves and will exclude people because they see the value in those, of staying ahead of the curve. And that's what's been so impressive to me. And believe, like I said, I come from a different world. I was willing to look sideways at it, but I haven't. I haven't, legitimately, because I don't need to do this. I don't need to do it. I would have walked away if I'd seen any chinks in that armor.
I'm sure.
I would have done.
The 2 million in the industry directly, how many of those are I mean, the situation you just described is obviously also for large mines. What about artisanal mines? How many are in that industry? And
funny enough, a similar amount. Around the mine sites, similar amount. Mm-hmm. Artisanal mining is obviously one of the most complex problems. And some areas have it more than others, as you know. I have my goal, and we are working towards this end. It's early stages, but I'm trying to do it, and you will see me up to my knees in mud in a suit doing this. But I'm trying to find a mechanism by which, working with the world's central banks, by which we can provide a mechanism that takes the gold from artisanal mining into our ecosystem through central banks, which means they will pay top dollar for it, provided that those miners adhere to responsible sourcing methods and don't use mercury, don't use cyanide in the production methods, because many deformities in those communities are occurring through use of these chemicals. If we can provide a mechanism, i.e. a target for those miners to hand their gold to a central bank, and the Philippine Central Bank already does this, it's called Domestic Gold Buying Program. If I can extend that, which is my goal, with common rules and common tax policies, all of it aspirational at the moment, but it is operating in the Philippines. There's only 6 or 7 others I need to convince. Then I formalize that industry. The advantage of formalizing it is that I get production, decent production methodologies, and I exclude the criminal gangs because there's a better place to sell your gold and it's legitimate.
So with the ASM world, one of the things that I wonder about is very often when a refinery has a production, where they take the gold directly from an ASM that they've onboarded, and they then sell the gold bar, it comes with a premium, which means that ultimately the downstream market may not buy as much. The commitment towards ESG very often stops at the wallet. And when you now say that you're actually involving the central bank, I mean, we have to explain a bit that ASMs have a choice, right? They can work according to certain standards, or towards those standards. Maybe it's also a process, not where they from day one have to be perfect, but they work towards those standards. So the KPIs would be those that show the change and the progress versus showing like the status quo. But let's assume whatever KPIs are formulated and they try to adhere to those, that kind of brings them into the onboarding to the refiners like in Switzerland, the Valcambis and the Argo Heraeuses of the world. Now, if they don't do that, then they're going to sell at a huge discount to the Chinese. That's really the reality, right? To some degree, well, maybe I shouldn't say to the Chinese. Well, there are good refiners, but basically you're selling to a part of the world which will basically pay them will pay them much less on the dollar from spot. So in this approach that you're thinking of, how are you approaching the pricing part? To me, it would almost seem like it would be enough if you paid 95% of spot or 90% of spot, but invested that money partially in being able to provide a cheaper ASM type green product, and invest part of that money in helping them actually get to where you want them to go.
Okay.
Is that part of the plan, and now I'm kind of brainstorming here.
Yeah, it is brainstorming, and we're in that process.
Okay.
But I would look upon it as we find a price that beats all the criminal gangs, that gives them the incentive to work towards a formalized future.
Correct.
That makes it worthwhile them adhering to responsible sourcing methods, so that we don't destroy the lives of people physically. Yeah. And that their gold isn't differentiated about
it's
when
not
it enters
sold
the
at a
ecosystem.
Premium. It's sold at the same price as other gold.
It goes into an LBMA accredited refiner and comes out like gold.
Yeah. That sounds like a good plan.
That's
the first time I hear this.
I don't
because
want
I've been a bit upset
marketed
by
as
the fact
ASM.
that everyone says, well, that always comes at a premium. It's going to be more expensive.
I want them to give them an opportunity to produce LBMA quality gold.
Because that will increase the demand overall, which increases their livelihood.
That's right.
Creates a better future.
I mean, if they want to, if somebody somewhere wants to try and market ASM gold as a premium because someone thinks it's cool, or conversely, someone says, I'm not going to encourage that job because we've got to stop doing it. It's a bit like boat people.
That is so cool that you're thinking along those lines, because ultimately, I've never heard that so far. I've always been wondering, the pricing and the economics of the whole situation can be turned in a way where it becomes much more a better product downstream for the market, but also a better future for those.
Well, we've discussed this before, but I think my priority is to not defragment them, do not further fragment the market. Bifurcation between different types and shapes and sizes of gold, I don't think is in the interest of the industry.
No.
It's definitely not the World Gold Council's interest, but I think more broadly, I think of a dollar as a dollar. I don't need a pink dollar, green dollar, blue dollar. I need dollar.
No.
And that's when it becomes perfectly divisible and trusted. I don't have to analyze it. If I have various types of gold, which you've got now, I've got 996, 995, 999. The average person approaching it for the first time goes, I'll go do something else. That's what I found. That's why I shut down the business. But if I knew it was gold, that'd be much easier to me.
It's really important that we emphasize what you just said, that what you're working towards is not a bifurcation of the market.
No, the opposite.
It's the opposite. It's actually something which, and that's also the philosophy of aXedras that we want to do, is we want to provide the tools that help the industry move forward, become better over time, without drowning in the bureaucracy and the paper of regulations and compliance. Because that's really the problem that you have, is if you don't have a digital standard, you're going to drown in forms and Sherlock Holmes work trying to figure out where stuff can come from.
This is the problem, and it creates a barrier to entry to the market. Again, reducing those things. Ultimately, imagine a situation, and I use LBMA only because it's preeminent. But think of everything being an LBMA bar. And running through every single gold bar is the words LBMA like a stick of rock through its DNA. Such that when gold leaves the current ecosystem, gets made to jewelry, when it comes back as scrap, that gold has LBMA running through it. You get a virtuous circle. You don't have any questions anymore. Like I said, if you sit outside and you don't have LBMA running through your gold, you've got to figure it out.
But that's the reality already today, to some degree.
So people will find ways of doing it. Perhaps stuff gets grandfathered into the system that is legitimate, but you work to it slowly, but you have to start somewhere.
Exactly.
And that's the critical thing. What you want is you do not really want, I don't need to know a dollar bill comes from Kentucky or a dollar bill comes from New York. All I want to know is a dollar bill. That's good. We need to not go right the way down, because for some people, extracting gold from Burkina Faso will be repulsive. To some, they'll be going, oh, great, I'm helping them.
Right.
And so you get bifurcated views on that gold. Whereas the standard of gold is exactly the same as in Nevada.
Right.
You see, same responsibly sourced. It's an LBMA accredited refiner. So we've got to stop that misconception growing. And so trying to run one standard through everything, the database is a good place to start, because we're starting with LBMA accredited gold bars.
And what's good to know also is that I think the LBMA and the World Gold Council are really joining forces to some degree in trying to make that a reality.
Definitely are.
And so that's good to know that the industry leaders are moving in that direction. One of the things also is the LBMA is talking about a database. And I think they understand the fact that, to do that database and do it right for the industry, it cannot be based on a centralized database structure. It has to be based on a structure that avoids abuse, manipulation, and insecurity, which...
Well, the priorities of, as I understand them, the LBMA's database for their own benefit, and their main concerns have been around duplication of bars, fraudulent bars, and elements that are eminently repeatable on a classic style database.
Right.
It just happens. Human beings, typos.
The problem of double spending is what I guess the term that is used a lot is huge with centralized database structures. And so that's where the importance of using more of a distributed ledger technology comes in. And there's the immutability aspect of it, etc. But that's really, for me, it's on the one hand, the fact that you can avoid double spending. The other thing, which I think is hugely important, is the fact that it's a much more stable and secure, even for hacking purposes, structure. Right. It's almost like an Al-Qaeda structure, where no one really has access to...
That's a very good point. To be honest, the centralized database can be hacked. Absolutely. All the information can be exposed in that one moment, right, which is an unnecessary risk when you have an alternative like a distributed ledger, where you can only go to one little piece at a time, and you can't find your way around the mechanism.
Yeah. Where the rules are fixed in a way, where the overall picture or reality is synchronized in a way where you don't have those issues.
And although our goal is to make sure that the ecosystem is interoperable, it would make enormous sense, back to my lack of fragmentation, for everybody to be on one ecosystem, because we've always got to remember that we're trying to appeal to international investors. We will understand a fragmented thing if we set it up, because we're in that world. But give a thought to the guy who's got $1 trillion at BlackRock, and he's got to try and unpick our decisions and understand why. So the more politics and more partisan stuff that we may have dealt with in the past that is perpetuated, we can eradicate, the chance of the investment manager at BlackRock looking at this market as grown up, homogeneous, transparent, easy to understand, and safe, we can get it. The more chance he's going to park his $1 trillion in our asset class. The more barriers we leave through personality differences, through different views, the trivia of life, we would have missed a massive opportunity. So I would urge everybody, as I am doing, to focus on consolidation, standardization, make it simple for the outside world to understand at all costs. Make it trusted. Simple.
It's such a convincing vision and argument. What's holding the industry back? What is making your job so difficult?
Firstly, has it been difficult? someone said to me when I first started this process, when I first sat down with everybody and my team were trying to educate me about gold, I shut my mouth shut for 6 months. I just listened to these guys because I didn't want to have any opinions because it's not good. And they described all these different things going on, these different shapes and sizes of gold. And I said, God's sake, why don't you just melt it all? Shove it in a big pot. All the bars would be the same. Everyone can understand it. That was where I started. And I held that thought. Okay. But what I noticed was that the industry, as I've said to many, seems to have grown up organically as opposed to being organized in any way. And as a consequence, you've created these fiefdoms I've described, all interoperating in a fiefdomish sort of way. It's not dysfunctional, but if you had a blank piece of paper, you wouldn't start like this. Right? You'd set up an org structure, and you decide, and you institute a framework, and everybody would interoperate and use one standard of everything. Easy, right? It's a bit like introducing IT systems to banks. They've just got them layered on top of each other, and they need to strip it out, but they don't.
I think that's a key message to the precious metals industry, is the fact that they have the opportunity of avoiding making the mistakes that the financial services industry has done,
absolutely.
Right? Because, I mean, if you look at the IT systems, if you look at the KYC forms in all varieties, which make life extremely difficult, actually some getting together, formulating digital standards for the banking industry globally, or even just in a country like Switzerland, would save so much pain and would create so much efficiency and room for innovation. And in the precious metals industry, I think we have the opportunity of actually doing that on a relatively green field, because the industry so far has not been that regulated. It's really now where the regulations are really starting to come in. Compliance and KYC in form of KYA, know your asset, is really growing. And so it's a huge opportunity to create a foundation for the future, which is much more difficult in financial services because they've gone so far down the road of all these rules and regulations, and it's a mess. And I think that's where precious metals can really use a huge opportunity.
I think probably
today.
the biggest obstacle, this guy said to me, David, the difficulty is not going to be the technology. You can design anything you like. The difficulty is going to be bringing the industry together to understand a common goal. And that has been my goal. I needed certain levers, which clearly was the precious metals document, to focus everybody's minds, i.e. it is broken, we can fix this stuff. There's the mission statement. Then what are we going to then try and do has come out. So database and digitalization, they are the two goals, the holy grails, because eventually you make gold HQLA, institutions will flood to it.
Can you explain HQLA real quick?
Not real quick. No, we're going to work on that. We've got I've set up a task force. LBMA, World Gold Council, and everybody else will be doing this, and we've set that up, and it's already going.
Okay.
But I think the one last thing that needs to change, and it is changing, is that when I came into this organization and into this industry, if I don't give myself too much credit here, please, I don't want this to sound wrong, I think many people distrusted me and my motives. They distrusted me because they enjoyed the current status quo because it wasn't broken, it was working, but the threat of trying to improve it was a bit too much, because the perception was that improvement is going to be bad for me. There was nothing proven, but the assumption was, what's going to happen here? It's going to try and take my world away, and my life and my income and my job and my canary and cats. My whole life is at risk here. Whereas I think since then, having worked with me on the Precious Metals Working Group, people understand my motivation is entirely picking this industry up from here, 1985, and shoving it to 2023, and making certain that we broaden its ability to participate, because that will augment demand. And the methods of doing it, as I say again, are reducing those barriers. That's it. And trying to get areas of this market to understand that to surrender the stranglehold you might have on various areas to help us grow it, gives you a bigger pie, a smaller piece of a much bigger pie. And that's the gamble. That's the vision that I've been trying to sell. When I first started this, nearly everyone said, no one will go for this, David. You give up. It's been like this for 35 years. You're not going to get blah, blah, blah. I went, yeah, fair enough, but we'll try. And recent meetings, as I've alluded to, have given me a very, very comfortable feeling that they understand that this is not a case of stealing someone's lunch. It's a case of creating a much better market.
Much better sandwich.
For everybody.
Yeah.
For everybody. No one excluded. No one is trying to rip something out and replace it with something. We're providing alternatives much broader with visions for the future that will compete alongside. And if they turn out to be the thing that grows the market out of all proportion, everyone will want to do it. But it's not saying this is the answer, you're not doing that. No. Stupid. But we will create opportunities for this market to grow. And people will continue to trust us, me at the World Gold Council, which has changed out of all proportion in 4 years. And I don't blame some people for doubting it at the outset, because the World Gold Council had a somewhat different persona then, and also a track record of trying to ram something down the market's throat at one point, LME Precious. That was mismanaged, I believe, to a degree. And this is a case of being equitable, taking the market with me, getting all the banks in a room, discussing what the future looks like, getting them to understand that they're not going to be robbed of anything, and that how much can we make this market into something really quite special. Digitization is the future. And if we can achieve that...
I mean, based on the discussions we're having in the market from the aXedras side and hearing you, I think as far as the digitization goes, or digitalization of the industry, it's, I think everyone gets that. I think by now everyone understands there are benefits of efficiency, of connectivity, interoperability, cost savings. I think where there's a lack of understanding still is the fact that digitalization is not just about saving costs and making things more efficient. It's actually about creating new products and new opportunities and making, what you said, the whole industry bigger. That part, I think, still needs more communication.
It does, and it depends on whom you talk to, who understands that and who doesn't. There are people who don't fear digitalizing a manifest process or digitalizing a process within the bank such that gold gets easily transferable.
Right.
They don't see a threat to that. Many people see a need for upgrading a clearing system and more transparency in the goods that will come to that. Where you start to get a more reticent response is when there's a perception of personal threat, or perception of, oh, well, this is our business model and we don't want that disrupted. I understand all that. I really do. And I'm not expecting people to suddenly flip on their back and hand over their crown jewels. I'm not doing that at all. I'm trying to be really realistic about how can we create an ecosystem, how can we melt all that gold in a way such that it becomes very, very easy to use, doesn't destroy everybody's personal lunches, joins up this ecosystem such that we, to the outside world, are able to present something that's divisible, usable, one of those 5 definitions of a currency that the rest of the world can use. The people who have hitherto not looked at this product because it confuses the hell out of them.
If you look at the alignment of the World Gold Council and the LBMA, from the outside it looks like it's largely aligned. Where are the differences? Where are the discrepancies, if any, in terms of moving forward?
Well, the LBMA define themselves as the gold market regulator. It's a quasi-regulatory position. I'm very clear, and I have been. This market does need a regulator.
It's a kind of SRO, right? A self-regulatory organization. In a way.
Yes, essentially. It's overseen by the Bank of England. It has an observer from the Bank of England, has a board, it has members from the banking and refining community, and it accredits those refiners. And it's been doing a great job looking after the London Good Delivery List for years and years and years and years. and I've had discussions with Ruth and about the ability for the regulatory aspects of that organization to grow. And I've, from day one, I've maintained strongly that I believe the market as a whole needs an Interpol, needs to be fully policed. Whether a formal regulator ever adopts us or not remains to be seen. We've got a long way to go before I think they do that, but we're on the right road. But I think it's fantastic that an organization could oversee the entire global market. I really do. Where I think, what we do as an organization is we support the case for gold. We are proponents of the gold, the asset class, gold, the physical product. We have got absolutely no interest in regulation per se. We're not going to put our foot into that. Where we've crossed over once, as I can understand it, is when we wrote the Responsible Gold Mining Principles, which were a set of standards that in a perfect world, you could say, should have been created by the regulator with the agreement of the industry.
Right.
But we did that. And so this was when the Venn diagram crossed over in that one little piece. Largely speaking, we sit on two different ecosystems. I would encourage, as I've said before, that to stay demarcated. I think what I would say is that the LBMA should be enforcing rules at the consent, with the consent of the entire market. Everybody buys into the fact that they're looked after by an LBMA that's fully funded and very strong. And do I think that there's this fully funded mechanism could be improved? Yes, and I've been very frank. I think it should be. But I think my aspirations for the LBMA is that they are strong, fully funded, with lots of power, acting with the consent of the entire market. I don't think we're there yet, and I'd love to work with them to make that happen.
Interesting. Maybe to change gears a bit, and we've talked a lot about helping the gold industry, but gold as a whole, if you look at it at history, gold has been an important piece of society to some degree, of human history overall. And your aspiration of making the gold industry more successful is also one to actually make gold more important again. Why is that important to you?
I came into this role with a very clear mandate, which was to open the institutional world to the asset class. Why were these guys, why didn't they care? Why were they apathetic? Why are they looking the other way? Why were they trading or not trading our product? And I think I've explained, largely speaking, why that is the case. So from a societal benefit, from an investor perspective, societal benefit, having gold as part of a portfolio benefits you. Unequivocally true. That's it. And having it between 3 and 8% in your portfolio, variable, proves is done. But many people don't know that. And we've been trying to tell people why that's an advantage. That's a diversification come risk mitigation story. Not exactly societal, but it is in some respects. But I think there are other ways in which we can do this. I think using this asset class in various parts of the world where fiat currencies are not trusted, for a variety of reasons, geoeconomic, geopolitical, just personal preference, inflation, histories, whatever it might be. Making this asset class utterly trusted and transferable on electronic means like iPhones for these people, rather than having to go to Western Union and convert and all that stuff that goes on. And to avoid people getting ripped off royally in societies where people get paid in local currency and rush to quickly convert it to gold because they hate the local currency so much, would be a great thing. Stabilizing it, formalizing it, and making gold, as we said, the ASM world more formalized as well in that regard, and saving lives. That's a good thing.
I think in the current context also, if we look at the big picture, we talked about that a bit yesterday, we're kind of in a time where we're looking in a way at almost the perfect storm, because the geopolitics have now been added to the monetary and fiscal imbalances. We've got huge debt worldwide. The West is drowning in debt. We have financial markets that are now tested, huge pools of debt in all kinds of reserves, bonds, in federal treasuries, and the question is, how does all this unfold in a time where now interest rates and inflation is going up? And you combine that also with other aspects like, a confluence of different new technologies coming along, demographics that are problematic, and also the fact that we have part of the world being less friendly towards America, where you're almost seeing a bit of a, maybe not the end, but definitely the attempt to end Pax Americana, kind of. And in that context, what's your view in terms of where we're going, your outlook, and then tying back to gold, where can it help, I guess, with regard to risk management?
I only regret that we didn't start this process to try and digitalize gold and make it so ubiquitous earlier. If we had, we'd be rather well placed right now to be the alternative go-to asset class on the planet. We just would be. And in many ways, we probably still are subconsciously to many people.
I mean, if I look at our client base, we're higher. We're like 10 to 15% physically allocated gold at this point in the portfolios. And some clients that have with BFI Bullion, they hold their precious metals, also silver, directly in an unencumbered and unbankable context. I feel to a big portion of the world, that's the case. I guess the part that's missing is really the banking part, right? The banking world has kind of left gold behind and therefore doesn't treat gold in that same fungible way that you would want to treat it.
That's right. Well, that's what we've been discussing. Yeah. Those institutions, those fund managers have grown up most of their lives, in fact, all their lives, a little known fact, 35 years in investment banking, trading every asset class under the world. Me?
You never touched a bar of
Not
gold?
once. I've not once traded gold. Yeah. And even to this day, I don't know why. I couldn't even explain. There was something that just kept me away from it. And I traded everything. So in that context, think of all the other guys who have never gone there either. And think of all those assets that should be in this asset class. Now, they may wake up to it because it'd be an opportunistic Bitcoin style trade. When volatility gets high enough, they'll all pile in, as we see these spikes in volatility.
We just saw now also with SVB and Signature Bank.
You see it jumps to 19 and something, whatever. But that's a volatility trade. It's not a investment. It's, options get bid up, volatility gets bid up, they all jump in, they all jump out again when it goes quiet. The long-term structural holding of gold is not familiar to many people. It is to some, but not to many. So where do I see the scenario going? As we discussed last night, as an example, I find it hard to see what is going to pull the plug on this ratcheting of tensions. I don't quite see what it is that's going to diffuse this at the moment. Now, it's truth be told that we've always had tensions. They have come and gone in history before, but I can see a situation where this can go terribly, terribly wrong.
Or escalates.
Yeah, and let's hope we have some common sense. But I keep comparing the two sides who seem diametrically opposed points of view, and talking to quite some very reasonable people on the other side who are as convinced they're right as we are. And it's very hard to see how we're going to diffuse this, which is concerning. I don't think we've peaked inflation yet. I thought these suggestions that it was going to come plummeting down with interest rates of 4% just didn't make any sense to me. And so I expect to see interest rates go higher. I don't know to where, but that will probably have to drive us into some form of recession before we start bringing them down to the original sustainable levels of some kind. We've been all surprised by the levels of growth and sustainable at 4%. Well, go figure, it's 4%. Most people can adjust to that. And so I expect to see that continue to tighten. And so I would, for geopolitical reasons, I see why gold was going to be continually attractive. For geoeconomic reasons, I see a pull in two directions. I see inflation and I see interest rates largely doing this. So why it's
central banks kind of stuck in the middle trying to balance the two.
Yeah,
right?
And that's why you've sort of seen 1850, 1900 for a long time now, because they're too push-me-pulley effect for the asset class. I don't see it going down there.
Interesting. If you look into the future and your outlook now for the markets, I guess yesterday I kind of shared that for us it's the most probable scenario is one of a stagflationary world where also central bank policy will kind of be a zigzag approach, trying to balance on the one hand, bringing back inflation, on the other hand, not going too far because there's this load of debt, which can affect real estate, can affect bonds, etc. What's your outlook or most probable scenario looking forward?
I don't disagree with your stagflationary outlook, to be honest. I think they will need to tighten more aggressively because they've prioritized inflation. Now, there's two ways of looking at it. If they're aggressive, I would advocate for aggressive, right? Because you bring down inflation hard and fast. And that puts a line through stagflation. You get the stagnation, but you don't get the stagflation.
Right.
And that's what I would do, because you can always cut them again and get things going. What I wouldn't do is be tentative and end up in a stagflationary environment.
Which they will do, though, because there's all kinds of political pressures and...
Yeah, but I think, I personally think that they will... Job number one is to get inflation down, because that has an impact on their debt levels too. They can inflate their way out of it, but I would advocate for raising interest rates aggressively, getting it down hard, and then rebuilding, rather than having that perpetuate.
That's that resilient part of you again. You're willing to take some pain to then build a better future, and most politicians and central bankers don't function that way these days. I think politics has gotten used to layering all problems over with more cheap money, kind of. Every
this is a
problem
compromise. I mean, and those debt levels are phenomenal. They've always been phenomenal, but they are phenomenal now. And I think the Kwazang Trust debacle we suffered through 6 to 8 months ago demonstrated the tolerance for more debt, for frivolous more debt, is not there. And I think that was a good wake-up call for everybody. And I think that also paints gold into a nice situation. But at some point, I just get this sense of impending doom. I'm not necessarily a pessimist.
No, I'm with you. I mean, we talked about that yesterday also over dinner, and I just think that right now there's so many moving parts and so many uncertainties at geopolitical level, at an economic level, at a social and even Western level with regard to society and values. So having that kind of risk management in your overall portfolio management, wealth management, I think is hugely important. And where we come from at BFI, it's not just the allocation and the investment itself, gold being a really important part of that, but it's also the structure, where you custody, where you keep your funds, etc. I think today that is really important, without being pessimistic, because there's also opportunities out there. But you do want to protect yourself against those black swans, I guess, that are flying all over the place.
Yeah, that being said, all these crises pass. They always have. I mean, the world is one big obstacle waiting for the next obstacle, waiting the next obstacle to overcome. And guess what? We always do. We always do. Whether it's tsunamis to nuclear this to war here, and they come and go.
Well said.
They come and go. I just don't want to be in a trench in Bakhmut. Thanks very much. I'm just feel so sorry for those people.
On that note, I think we can start coming towards the end. In your view, also thinking of your children, they're grown now almost, I believe. What do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities down the road?
I think it's probably more challenges than opportunities, sadly. And one of those things I struggle with is was I really, really lucky to be born at a certain point in an economic cycle? So lucky? Will it ever be repeated again? All my children are on a salary where they will never own a home.
We were born in the right time and also the right place, right? I think we did get really lucky. The thing to be said about what you said before, that it's we should get rid of inflation, we should raise the rates, and maybe allow for a recession, maybe even a more severe crisis, often that's what's needed, right? Sometimes you need a wildfire to restart. To restart for the kids, get rid of the debt, start anew, and that generation then has a chance to become resilient and build a new future, and that can be very inspiring. Right now, it's a bit dire.
But if you look at just house prices in the UK, even if house prices fell 50%, that would still leave most properties out of reach for the average starter salary, or even relatively well considered significant salaries on average.
Yeah.
Can't do it. But yeah, that's the thing that worries me. Opportunities, I don't know. Technology, I guess.
Yeah.
But I don't know how that's going to manifest itself.
How do we end this on a positive note?
Yeah, just remember never to invite me to dinner parties.
David, thank you so much. This was great.
Pleasure.
And
Thank you
for
having me.
taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know you're traveling all over the place. And
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's good.
thank you. That's good.